Some celebrity transformations are so dramatic that people assume there must be one simple explanation. But the truth is usually much messier. For these 7 stars, weight loss came from completely different places. A health scare, a prison sentence, a major lifestyle reset, surgery, medication, or in one case, an emotional breakdown that forced someone to rebuild her life from the inside out. And that's what makes these stories worth looking at. Because the biggest transformation isn't always the one you can see. By the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why the most dramatic change on this list had almost nothing to do with appearance. Starting at number 7 is Randy Jackson. For years, American Idol viewers knew him as the easygoing judge sitting behind the desk, delivering quick reactions and memorable one-liners. But behind that familiar television image, Randy was dealing with a serious health issue. He was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and that diagnosis forced him to rethink a lifestyle that had become increasingly difficult to manage. In 2003, Randy made a major decision. He underwent gastric bypass surgery. The procedure helped him lose more than 100 pounds, and the physical change was dramatic. But here's where his story becomes more interesting. The surgery wasn't the ending, it was the beginning. Randy has spoken openly about how difficult it was to maintain the weight loss afterward. Because surgery can change the body, it cannot automatically change every habit. So he had to rebuild his relationship with food. He focused on portion control. He paid more attention to what he ate. And physical activity became part of his long-term routine. That's what separates Randy's story from the typical celebrity before and after narrative. The dramatic moment happened quickly, but the real transformation took years. And that is often the part people never see. Weight loss gets celebrated in photographs. Maintenance happens quietly, day after day, year after year. Randy eventually became much more vocal about health and diabetes awareness, using his own experience as proof that one medical intervention does not solve everything. But our next celebrity didn't begin his transformation with surgery. His wake-up call came from realizing that his weight had become a serious risk during one of the most frightening health crises in recent history. At number 6 is Billy Gardell. Audiences knew him as the lovable, relatable star of shows like Mike and Molly. His size was part of his screen presence, but behind the humor, Billy was dealing with something far more serious. At one point, his weight climbed close to 400 pounds. He was also managing type 2 diabetes. And for years, he understood that his health needed attention. But understanding the risk and actually changing your life are two very different things. Then the COVID-19 pandemic changed the equation. Suddenly, Billy's weight and underlying health issues weren't abstract concerns anymore. They represented a much higher risk of severe illness. That realization forced him to take the situation more seriously. But rather than chasing an extreme overnight transformation, Billy took a slower approach. He began changing the way he ate. He focused more on consistency. He accepted medical support. And he started thinking about weight loss as something tied to survival and quality of life, not simply appearance. Over time, the results became impossible to miss. Billy lost more than 150 pounds. But the visual difference was only part of the story. He also spoke about having more energy and feeling more in control of his health. And that's what makes his transformation important. He didn't suddenly decide he wanted to look like a different person. He reached a point where continuing the same way no longer felt sustainable. The pressure came from health, not Hollywood. But number 5 faced a completely different kind of pressure. His life changed because of legal trouble, prison, and eventually being forced to start over in another country. Number 5 is Joe Giudice. For years, viewers of The Real Housewives of New Jersey saw Joe living a loud, comfortable, and often excessive lifestyle. But behind the confidence, there were problems building. Financial issues, legal trouble, and habits that were becoming harder to ignore. Eventually, those problems caught up with him. Joe was convicted on federal fraud-related charges and began serving a prison sentence in 2016. That moment changed everything. His freedom disappeared. His routine disappeared. And many of the habits that had defined his life were suddenly no longer available. Inside prison, Joe turned toward exercise. At first, it may have been one of the few ways he could manage stress and structure his day. But over time, the routine became something more. He became noticeably leaner, stronger, and far more physically disciplined than viewers remembered. When he was released in 2019, the transformation was obvious. But that wasn't the end of the story. Soon afterward, Joe was deported to Italy. He had already lost his freedom. Now he was separated from the life and family structure he had known in the United States. That forced another reinvention, and that's why Joe's story is bigger than weight loss. His appearance changed because his entire environment changed. The life that had encouraged excess was gone. What replaced it was structure, limitation, and the need to adapt. Sometimes transformation begins with motivation. Sometimes it begins because life leaves you no other option. And number 4, experienced something very similar. Except his transformation was even more dramatic. More than 100 pounds disappeared while he was behind bars. At number 4 is Jorge Nava. When viewers first saw him on 90 Day Fiancé, Jorge had a much heavier build and a lifestyle that seemed relatively unstructured. Then everything changed in 2018. He was arrested in Arizona after authorities found a large amount of marijuana in his vehicle. Eventually, he was sentenced to prison. And like Joe Giudice, incarceration removed almost every distraction from his normal life. No old routine, no familiar comforts, no easy escape. Just time. And that time became the turning point. Jorge began reading more. He explored personal development and started thinking differently about responsibility and the direction his life had taken. Then he changed his daily habits. He improved his diet. He started exercising consistently. And slowly, the transformation became visible. By the time he left prison in 2020, Jorge had lost more than 130 pounds. The difference was so dramatic that many viewers struggled to connect his new appearance with the man they remembered from television. But the weight loss itself wasn't the most important part. Jorge said the process changed the way he thought. He gained discipline. He developed more control over his routine. And he came out of prison with a completely different sense of direction. That's what separates his story from the typical celebrity makeover. There was no red carpet, no trainer following him for a magazine spread, no glamorous wellness retreat. The transformation happened in one of the most restrictive environments imaginable. And it raises an interesting question. How much of our behavior is really about willpower? And how much is shaped by environment? Because once Jorge's environment changed, almost everything else changed with it. But number 3 proves that you don't need prison to completely rebuild your life. Sometimes all it takes is realizing the way you've been living may not work much longer. Number 3 is Action Bronson, and his transformation may be one of the biggest lifestyle reversals on this list. For years, food wasn't just something Action enjoyed. It was part of his identity. He was a rapper, a former chef, a television personality, and much of his public image was built around huge meals, indulgence, and celebrating excess without apology. But eventually, that lifestyle started catching up with him. At his heaviest, Action weighed well over 350 pounds. And the larger he became, the harder it was to ignore what that weight could mean for his long-term health. Then the pandemic created an unexpected pause. For the first time in years, the normal pace of travel, performances, and constant activity slowed down. Action used that time to completely restructure his routine. He started training early, sometimes before sunrise. His workouts included boxing, strength training, and high-intensity conditioning. But exercise was only half the change. He also had to rethink the very thing that had helped define his career: food. Instead of constant indulgence, Action started prioritizing protein, moderation, and more controlled portions. And eventually, the results became dramatic. He lost more than 125 pounds. But the transformation wasn't just visible in photographs. He became more mobile. His endurance improved. And physically, he looked like someone who had completely rewritten his daily life. That's what makes Action's story so compelling. He didn't abandon who he was. He changed how he lived. And number 2 took a very different approach. Instead of relying only on lifestyle changes, he openly used medication after a doctor warned him that his weight had become a serious health threat. At number 2 is Charles Barkley. During his NBA career, Charles was one of the most physically powerful players in basketball. His entire life revolved around competition, training, games, travel, and a level of physical demand most people will never experience. Then retirement happened. And like many former athletes, the structure disappeared. Without constant training and competition, Charles gained weight. A lot of it. At his heaviest, he has said he was over 350 pounds. Eventually, his doctor gave him a warning. If he didn't make serious changes, he could be putting himself at risk for major health problems, including diabetes. That was the moment Charles decided he needed help. In recent years, he openly discussed using Mounjaro as part of his weight loss journey. Combined with changes to his daily habits, the medication helped him lose more than 60 pounds. And what makes his case interesting is how openly practical he was about it. This wasn't about pretending discipline suddenly returned overnight. It wasn't about proving he could do everything naturally. It was about using a medical tool when his health had reached a point where doing nothing was no longer a good option. That is an important distinction. Celebrity weight loss often gets framed as vanity. But Charles wasn't trying to fit into a Hollywood costume. He was dealing with aging, retirement, and the long-term consequences of a body that no longer lived like a professional athlete. And that makes his story surprisingly relatable. Your body changes, your routine changes. The methods that worked at 30 may not work at 60. But number one takes us somewhere completely different. Because Adele's transformation may have looked physical from the outside. For her, it started with anxiety. Taking the number one spot is Adele. And her story is different from every other transformation on this list. Because the dramatic weight loss that captured headlines wasn't actually the thing she was trying to achieve at first. For years, Adele lived under enormous public scrutiny. Her music was celebrated. Her voice was praised. But people also felt strangely entitled to discuss her body. Then her personal life changed. Her marriage to Simon Konecki ended. And even though the separation was handled relatively privately, Adele later spoke about the emotional impact of that period. She experienced intense anxiety. At times, she struggled to feel stable, and she needed something that could give her structure. That something became exercise. But here's the twist. She didn't initially start working out because she wanted a dramatic celebrity makeover. She discovered that exercise helped calm her anxiety. It gave her routine. It gave her somewhere to put the emotional energy she was carrying. And slowly, the physical transformation followed. As Adele lost weight, the internet exploded. Some celebrated her. Others questioned why people suddenly seemed more interested in her body than her music. But Adele repeatedly framed the change as something deeply personal. It was connected to feeling stronger, more stable, more in control. And that's why she belongs at number one. Because her story completely flips the usual before and after narrative. From the outside, people saw weight loss. From the inside, she was rebuilding her life after a painful emotional period. The body was simply the part everyone else could see. And maybe that's the lesson running through every story on this list. The most visible transformation is rarely the whole transformation. These 7 stories may look completely different, but they all reveal the same thing. Real transformation rarely starts with appearance. Sometimes it begins with fear. Sometimes with discipline. Sometimes with loss. And sometimes with the realization that something has to change. Which transformation surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that go deeper than the before and after photos, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.